All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Data Innovators Conference 2023 Expert Panel, Top Data Initiatives for 2023, ROI and Data Strategy in the Face of Emerging Technologies like Generative AI and Knowledge Graphs. I'm Mandy Sadowski. I'm the VP of Marketing at Stardog. It's an enterprise knowledge graph platform that can connect data across the enterprise based on relationships and business meaning, rather than where and how the data is stored. I'm really excited to be here on the panel, to meet the panel. So let's go ahead and do that. Really quick, before I have folks introduce themselves, a quick disclaimer that the panelists are here with us today sharing their opinions. So their commentary doesn't reflect the views or opinions of their respective organizations. So no official company lines here, just a discussion about innovation and how to leverage it. So let's go ahead and go around the horn. It would be great for each of you to just tell us a little bit about your background, what you do in your current role. And we'll try to keep this to under a minute, give everybody a feel for who's on the panel today. So I'll call on folks to keep things moving along in general throughout the day, including for the intros. But that said, anytime you feel like you really need to jump in, hey, I have something to say here, you're welcome to do that. So you don't have to wait for me to call on you. I'll try to do that to keep things smooth, but do it make sense for you. All right, so let's go ahead and introduce ourselves. Melissa, would you like to go first?
Yes, good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me be part of this panel. I'm Melissa Ngamini. I'm a lead data scientist at ADP, where it's a human capital management company. I have a lot of experience with data science and natural language processing, lexicon building, graph theory. And also in my spare time, volunteer for athletics, where I'm the head of education, where we are hoping to help the most vulnerable gain economic independence through a data analytics bootcamp. So that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Excellent. Analytics bootcamp. Cool. All right. Meet, over to you.
Thank you, Mandy. Good morning. My name is Patel. I have been in data science space for nearly, I would say, about 15 years, while working at a startup to Fortune 10 companies across multiple industries. In my current role at Kellogg company, I'm part of the global advanced analytics team, and I lead the strategy capabilities and change management. I am primarily responsible for driving growth, insights, and innovations by leveraging AI and ML across multiple domains, including full funnel marketing, revenue growth management, retail, and e-commerce. And I look forward to the panel.
I love it. You get to hang out with Tony in your office. I like that too. Jan, could you introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. My name is Zirnstein. My current role is as the Senior Director of Data Science here with the Honeywell Connected Enterprise. We are the software arm of a large industrial conglomerate. I have the pleasure of leading a few analytics teams to work on both the enterprise analytics, so helping Honeywell become more data and more model-driven in its execution and its digital transformation, as well as then also on our products and services side, things like condition-based maintenance on commercial aviation, and energy efficiency and sustainability in commercial buildings. I found my way to data science through high energy particle physics, and I was really lucky to find a spot in the global R&D labs of Honeywell. And I've been here now for about eight years. Looking forward to contributing here with the rest of the panel.
Interesting path. Lina, over to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lina Lee. I currently lead the advanced analytics architecture for Travelers insurance company that based in Connecticut. So my career started as a software developer, like most computer science major graduates. And I fortunately discovered my passion in data, like basically turning data into the insights during my decision science program. That's almost 20 years ago. So I have been in information architecture practice for the most part of my career and supporting back then researchers that using SAS, and now it's much advanced and fancy. That's the data scientist community. The past few years since I took this role, it has been quite a journey with our teams in implementing the predictive modeling and AI models in the cloud and integrate with our application system. Yeah, the world is not the same now than 10 years ago with the cloud computing, with the AI technologies. So it's been really fun journey.
Sure, for sure. All right, and last but not least, Evren, would you introduce yourself, please?
Thanks, Mandy. I work with Mandy at Stardog. I'm the CTO and one of the founders of Stardog. As Mandy mentioned, we develop a knowledge graph platform, which serves as a semantic layer to connect data distributed within organizations, making the connections again between these disconnected data sets to provide insights. I don't have a background in data science, to be clear up front. My background is more in data management and knowledge representation, but we work with lots of Fortune 500 companies, manufacturing, healthcare and life sciences, and finance, who have data science, data analytics, business intelligence problems. So we are familiar with the problems that data scientists have. And yeah, I'm very excited about the panel.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for introducing yourselves. Let's just get started. A lot of questions and things to talk about here today. I believe that toward the end, we'll be also taking questions from the folks that are listening, the data innovators that are here at the conference. So let's just start at the top here. Everyone's talking about it, large language models, especially, right? Graph technology, virtual reality. These new technologies are pushing the boundaries and challenging our current infrastructure, our policies. How in the heck are we keeping up out there? So maybe Jan, I'll start with you. How is your organization dealing with this?
Yeah, thanks. And really, I think about this in kind of three different ways. First and foremost, from a technology perspective, right? And I think it's maybe not easy, but at least straightforward to stay informed. And I think everybody here on the call has taken that step, right? It's being involved in the communities of practice. It's going to conferences, whether it's in person for the networking opportunities or attending virtually and getting the content from panels, from keynotes, from breakout sessions. But then also afterwards, a lot of conferences publish their proceedings, going through that. We've got a journal club here in my organization, and we bring in conference proceedings and kind of go through it as a team and see how that would impact the work that we do. So I think that's kind of on the technology side. The second part, then, you'd also mentioned kind of breaking boundaries or challenging also our infrastructure.
Yeah.
And for that, I think we rely very heavily on strategic technology partners, right? So infrastructure isn't Honeywell's competitive advantage, right? It's not a differentiator for us, but for our strategic partners, whether that's under NDAs or through advisory boards, we're able to learn about the products, the offerings that they're going to bring to market, and we're able to influence that with the capabilities that we need of how we see these technologies applying in our products and services. And therefore, you kind of have the symbiotic relationship, that necessary feedback loop, where those partners then get to incorporate that into their product roadmap. And lastly, I think on the policy side, and I kind of took this maybe a little bit broader, in that there are obviously legislation being drafted about data rights specifically. And there I can say we're pretty lucky here in Honeywell to have a very involved and active government relations function. And so through that, we get to be part of the legislative process, whether in the US or abroad, and we get to comment on any potential consequences that would be a burden for an organization like Honeywell. And I'll give you an example there, where currently the EU Data Act is under discussion in Brussels. And on the face of it, it's, I think, a fantastic idea, giving the users more control and actually ownership, and through that control of their data, and specifically IoT data, right? If you think about wearables, we all have our Apple Watches on and whatnot. But with that, then with the EU Data Act, the requirement for a company is to make that data available to a user at on short notice through an easy portal, et cetera. But not just the raw data that's captured by that device, also any derived data. And that derived data often represents the differentiating IP of that company. And if you make that available, it's going to be fairly easy to be reverse engineered of what you put into that product. So that's just an example of how we work through an industry panel to try to call out some of these unintended consequences while still being able to push through the meaningful parts of legislation. So I think in summary for me, it's three things. It's staying involved with the analytics communities for the technology. It's leveraging our strategic partners for the infrastructure and other parts that aren't differentiators for us, that are more commodity, and influencing their roadmaps. And lastly, then really being able to rely on our legal function.
Yeah, really interesting. And for the people that are in the audience today, like there's some that are in big companies like that, some at small who might be like, oh, we don't have that lever, that much to put there. So that's very interesting. Thanks for sharing that. Evren, did you want to weigh in here too?
Yeah, maybe I want to just make one observation. Like at any point, I think it feels like there's this whole wide range of new technologies coming up, and we are always like bombarded with these things. Like last year I was at a panel and there was a very similar question. The topic was more about, oh, there are these different architectures, data mesh versus data fabric. How can I learn about these? So I like to make that observation that I guess at any point we are having this kind of challenge. And yeah, one thing I would tell people is to focus on, like, when these new technologies emerge, like look at the results to kind of separate the hype from the reality and what are the use cases. And, maybe to be a little controversial here, like blockchain was one of the biggest things 3-4 years ago. Everybody was talking about it. And there are definitely, I'm not dismissing it completely, there are very good use cases for blockchain, but some of the use cases were maybe not perfectly fit for the technology. And when you look at the results and use cases people talk about, you can see, okay, I can make use the technology in my current role for the current problems I'm looking at. So if you look at, for example, large language models, you can see what they are delivering, what kind of results you would get, and immediately see, okay, this might be useful in these areas, but maybe not in these other areas.
Yeah, that's a really good point. At any given time, it's say, hey, all this new stuff is coming. How are you dealing with it? And it's going to keep coming at us. That's really interesting, Evren. All right. In the interest of just keeping things moving, I'm going to keep firing through questions. Again, if you feel compelled that you want to speak up, go ahead and jump in. So let's move on. I'm talking about maybe your stance or experience with enterprise deployment of large language models, considering private data, training, scaling challenges, the number of applications that you have. And Meet, I think I'll start with you.
Absolutely. So I think Evren really brought up a great point about use cases, and you really have to show the value of, I think speaking of technology is one thing. It's like, hey, you got the new technology. How are you going to leverage that? How are you going to really drive the value proposition? And what sort of incremental value that you're going to create as well? And so in my opinion, I mean, when we think about like large language models, it's a pretty complex model. It's easier said than done. So I'm kind of like going to really take on the journey. So imagine if you are a company looking to improve your employee experience or productivity by creating a chatbot. And you're going to utilize large language models. So essentially, you're making your employees enable features like, how do I do something? Or where can I find something, right? And you would have all this information available live, so that you're driving the productivity, you're creating the operational efficiency within the company. Now here comes the technical part, right? You got these large language models, they're trained on the outside data, but you have your own internal, kind of like a wiki, or you have your own internet, and you have your own company specific data. So you have to kind of like train that data with the large language model, so your models are really more prone to your business or more customized towards your business. But the way you would train the data is like you would have to have API connections where you're probably pushing the data forward and you're bringing it back, right? Because you're really sending your model inputs and outputs. So the interesting thing that happens is that now you're getting into the privacy. It's like, well, do you feel comfortable pushing your company proprietary data outside? Or would you consider alternative options, which could be that you would create your own LLM models within your own firewall, but then it's not going to be as large language. It may potentially be a small language model. So there is that piece, right? And then I think that there's a lot of development is taking place at the moment, right? Every day you're finding new development. So I feel like, we are probably going to be within the next few months, we're going to be at a kind of like a sweet spot where depending on your use case, again, you find an ideal solution that may fit your needs, whether it's from a data privacy standpoint, whether it's a model training standpoint, and a scalability challenge as well. So interesting times, excited to talk about it, but let's see where the future holds, perhaps in a few months.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Melissa, I'd be interested in having you weigh in here. Other thoughts related to your stance and experience with this.
Yes, thank you. I think that Meet touched on a lot of good points there about, the large language model. I think that for a company like where I work, ADP, where it's like we have very specific things that we do for our customers, like that. Having the large language model, we come to the point where, sometimes it's doing the things that we want, but it doesn't understand what we are talking about because we have very specific things. So then we have to think about how do we build our own language model, which will probably take a long time, but maybe fine-tuning those language models that are already out there to our data. And that process now becomes a little bit difficult because how do we do that in the most efficient and, scalable way? Because the data, again, is enormous, right? So I think that those are the type of things that we are running into. I think it's very important that we figure out what are the domains and what are the use cases that we want to do those things in and focus our energy there. And when we figure that part out, I think it's very easy then to be able to put it on other use cases. So that's kind of the things that we're thinking about right now, just thinking about what are the use cases where we can do things very easily and make sure that they are scalable, and then use them to, use that, what we have learned to get it to the other use cases that may be more pertinent and, bringing us the most return on our investments. I think that will be my opinion on that.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's like a theme, right? Let's make sure we know what we're working with before we roll this thing out widely.
Just to jump in with one thing here too, because Melissa, I think you're absolutely right on the use case perspective. I mean, thinking about the limitation of a technology, and I think Evren said it earlier as well, where the use cases aren't the right fit for the technology. And we've seen the articles of the hallucination part of the LLMs as well. So as you evaluate the use cases, think about what the failure mode would be. What if it gives the wrong prediction? What happens? Is it somebody gets an incorrect product recommendation? Okay. Is it that you're going to shut down a critical asset in a hospital? So think about the failure modes of these implementation for these use cases as well, and keep that in mind as you evaluate these technologies.
Yeah, good point. Interesting. All right, Lina, I'd love to get you involved here. I have a question. What new problems, what new technologies need to be accounted for in your data strategy here in 2023? So we've talked around a lot of it. It kind of overlaps, but I'd like to hear kind of what you're dealing with as well.
Yeah, thank you. So I echo it, lots of stuff that other panelists have talked about. So coming from, I think, a little slightly different perspective, thinking of the LL, the large language model, the older AI has a little more of the data scientist focus, right? So that's how I feel like the technology, the technique are all improving how to extract the information out of data through various techniques. But from architecture, from technology, from the implementation perspective, you need to feed all this data for training perspective, for the inference time, for execution time, and also I think earlier I was also touched upon all these derivation, this insights, this enriched data coming out of the large language, coming out of the new media, the IoT, all the information. Where do you have those data available, accessible, and easily integratable? So that we're not only all looking at the new things that from the IoT, from the documents, because traditionally we got really good with structured data. And in the new era, it's the unstructured data that I feel like the AI is really shining in the space. But let's not forget the old too. So while we are all marching on the AI, the new data, but combining with that, with what we already have, the knowledge, the information we already have, and how to combine that to make that data more readily available for our data science community. I feel like that's also an area, some new technology. Maybe people, just for now, like chasing the most exciting thing, but meanwhile, don't forget to build this foundational layer, right, for data access, for data integration, and including those privacy that's part of the data access or process access. So a platform of making all these things easier, more efficient, more productive for all the players in the field, data scientists, data engineer, and the business people. So overall, that will bring more success for the companies.
And then what an interesting good reminder, interesting point. Like, it's easy to go chase the shiny new thing. I saw a lot of nodding heads on the panel. Would anyone else like to go ahead and weigh in and chime in with what Lina said?
I will say that I think that, sometimes with the new shining things, you're already kind of there already on your path, and you're almost there and trying to figure out the problem. And because this new shining thing comes up, they think, okay, forget about what you're doing. Let's try this one because it will give us the same problem, but it's almost like you're getting back to the beginning to also get at the same point where you were when you were moved to the side, right? So I think that's why I was noting, because I feel like sometimes, we are already there as data scientists. We are almost reaching that point, but now you have to switch our mindset to this new way of thinking, new, different, machine learning model or large language model. And then it's like, we have to then think about how do we put this new unstructured data that we had before, how do we put it in this thing? How is this thing learning? And then the papers are not very clear because they don't want to share everything with us. And it's like, okay. And then you get back to the same point where they have moved you instead of letting you continue on that path. And maybe you would have just, wasted 2 months to do something. Where you could have gotten the 2 months to just get to the finish line.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, Lina, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so I feel like that's why that's a balance, right? So while a team, marching forward, and don't forget, you may want to allocate additional resource to build a foundation. So when the marching team is ready, now that you can achieve the most, speed to market delivery.
For sure.
Yeah, if I can jump in,
please.
I mean, great points, but I'd like to go back to one thing Jan pointed out, which resonated a lot with me about the failure points and like these hallucinations and like kind of some of the drawbacks as well, because as we start using these large language models, they are statistical in nature. You are not even guaranteed to get the same answers twice in a row. So we need to take this into consideration when we are integrating these new technologies. For example, we know from our customers in financial domain, like they have use cases about operational risk or regulatory compliance. You cannot generate answers that are probably almost right, but not right. Like you need to have that kind of confidence. And that's where I think, going back to like the new data initiatives, I think we'll see more of the integration of this statistical reasoning and more logical reasoning. I'm a little bit biased because that's the area we work on, but combining this kind of statistical, maybe not precise results, but very powerful results with logical and more explainable inferencing will be a very hot topic in the upcoming months and years.
Anyone care to weigh in on that? Jan, I see you nodding your head. Anything to add?
Absolutely. And yeah, to echo the use case discussion, because there's absolutely the right fit for generative models, right? And whether it's in a marketing campaign, whether it's in even code generation, right? Copilot, we've seen it through GitHub and with AWS and others picking it up. There are absolutely applications where you don't have to get it right the first time, where there is a human that's then taking that as input, as a starting point. You don't stare at a blinking cursor on an empty Word document anymore, right? So there are plenty of use cases where the value is there, where you're not requiring absolute certainty. On one hand, and we've seen the Wolfram Alpha integration now with ChatGPT. Obviously, from a logical reasoning perspective, it's getting better at math problems, right? But when you're asking it to recollect, and I'll mention Stardog here from a knowledge graph perspective, you have all that data, and if that becomes part of your training regimen, and you're expecting it to answer questions factually correct based on information in a knowledge graph, it's not guaranteed to do it. It's going to sound right, but did it actually do it? So it's part of the use case construction of these technologies then, of the LLMs and generative AI in general.
Interesting. All right, and then Meet. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was like, certainly, I think it has a really solid use case, especially in the marketing and content creation space, because you really want that differenceness from one content to other content. And then, of course, you have a human bias that's going to overlay and course correct or personalize the storyline as well. So totally, I really like that. Well, you got two extremes, which one you're going to really, put it into production, and how you can really train the human to really, be in the driver's seat and navigate that. So.
Yeah, I also saw you nodding, Meet, when I was struck by Melissa's comment about you're about to the finish line and then something new comes on. It's like, oh, okay, we're going to reinvestigate this. And it can almost feel, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Melissa, but almost feel like some stuff just doesn't get past the finish line. We don't stay the course. I think I saw you nodding a little bit there. Do you have anything to add to that part of the discussion, Meet?
No, I mean, that's the story of the data scientist. There's never perfect, and the minute you go on the saga of trying to get the perfect, it just becomes too complicated. So sometimes I feel like you take a pause, reevaluate, and look for what is the additional gains you're gonna get for the net input that you're gonna put in, and that's kind of like, I guess, going back to the ROI calculation that we started the journey with. So.
Yeah. And we'll talk about ROI here in a moment too. I think we should, but I want to make sure too we're thinking about the business. So what or how this all impacts the business for you all. What are the critical success factors today? For success. Is it staffing? Is it agility? Is it management? Is it technology? Is it your architecture? There's a lot of things. So from your world, kind of what are some of those critical success failures? Melissa, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think for, because, we are all, data scientists trying to solve problems. I think that the success factor probably will start with, I guess, the management, the people who are there, giving us guidance or telling us the different things that we have to do. And they are able to basically, use us in the right way, like just let us focus on certain things, like this particular team will be focused on that, and this particular team will be focused on this other thing, like I said before, because you cannot move the whole team to this new shiny thing, because, maybe we are already close to the finish line. So how do they go about, allocating the right people to the right projects, right? And I think, of course, staffing will be important. You have to have the right people in the team so that they can interact with each other and do what they need to do. But I think that for data scientists, probably it will be the architecture, because it's really important that we have all that we need, the access to all the models. Like, sometimes, you get to a point like, you don't have enough, GPU or CPUs, whatever. And it's like, how do I do that? Like, then you have this model. How do I integrate it into my system? Because I'm only allowed to work in this system, but this model doesn't work here. I think those are probably the places where I think that in order for the team to succeed, we need to make sure that those things are already there, regardless of how the team is set up, so that at least you can do the work that you need to do in an efficient manner and a productive manner. So I would say that that's what I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. Lina, care to weigh in on that as well?
Yeah. I did hear Melissa mention architecture. Yeah, so totally, agreed. I think many already alluded to that business case, right? What is the business value that team is trying to achieve? And also we feel the pain of, new things keep coming up. Like halfway through, there's a new vendor that's being evaluated. How soon we can get that to to be deployed and ready for team to adopt? And do we wait for what we are doing and wait until the next, that's another buy versus build, right? I think that's another perspective probably people also run into. But in this, I would say keep the momentum and define the scope. So early on, use the business case and set the scope. And sometimes there are things keep going on, but you may just have to get to the finish line, like Melissa said. So that's striking between what's the perfect world, what's reality, what's deliverable, what's realistically deliverable, and also, of course, this is all the AI, so I'm sure it's already the shiny object. Is not, it just sometimes is know when to stop, know what's good enough from both modeling perspective and both technology perspective. I think that balance is critical to reach consensus early on among the stakeholders.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. So I know we've talked a bit about emerging technologies, and all of this overlaps. So there's not really discrete buckets, but one of the key pieces of the title of this panel is ROI and data strategy. And we haven't really talked about ROI yet. So I'd like to jump to that a little bit before we start to get to audience questions and stuff. So maybe we can talk about the ROI and data initiatives. Meet, I'll start with you. Thoughts about that and how you view it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is like a hot topic always. Show me the value, right? So it is really, I would say, hard to measure ROI for data initiatives, especially when you have like a multiple projects going on, or even several projects going on, because they all are probably in a different efficacy. They're probably at a different stage, and then you probably have some setbacks. You take 2 sides forward, and then you kind of like move forward. So it's always like a dynamic chessboard. So I like to think about it like, so in my opinion, I mean, you can take a bottom-up approach, which is kind of like saying you have a particular use case or the project that you're working on. This is the expected value that creation is going to have. Whether you can look at it from an EBIT standpoint or operating profit that is going to drive this particular, whether it's a feature or the product. And once you get to that, then you kind of like reverse engineer from the back and say, well, if I were to, whether it's augment new technology and is going to have a multiple use across multiple projects, how do I discount that cost against my total value that I'm going to generate? So once you get that factored in, it keeps the model very dynamic. And where I think it gets interesting is you could apply like a decision tree models, because ultimately it's going to get really complex tree, and you have to apply some sort of probabilistic approach to say, well, now the project has 70% chance that it's going to generate X, Y value. So now you control for that, you control for the cost factor as well, and ultimately you have a actual ROI, a directional ROI that you're targeting towards. So that's kind of like, I would say, one of the efficient ways that I have applied in our work, but I'm sure there are other ways that you can tackle the similar problem.
Yeah, it's tough, right? How do you model adoption? Or I guess you're guessing, you're taking your best shot, educated guess. Yeah, interesting. All right. Others want to weigh in on ROI. Jan, anything to add here?
Yeah. So in terms of the revenue or operating income of a new capability that's enabled by technology, I think Meet covered that well. There's the flip side of that, which is the cost saving side of now adopting a technology that's improving on whether it's a storage capability. So you have the use case you were working with. Maybe let's take an example of a graph database. You can host graph databases in SQL. It's not very efficient from a storage mechanism, and the operations that you're going to do on that are not very computationally efficient either, but you can do it. So if you adopt now a graph database as a new technology, you can also take a measurement of cost savings, of enabling that use case, having that same revenue come in based on, let's say, a SaaS subscription. But now your margins go up because you are saving on cost of the underlying technology that you're using to host the solution, as an example. And then the other part would be for me, and this is something that we've taken in my team on, is the productivity gains, right? Being able to break down barriers, whether it's integrations of various tools and technologies, whether it's part of an ML ops lifecycle, and go for more automation, but it's really in the productivity gains and democratizing, data access. I've heard that here before as well. Leveraging AutoML solutions just to get a great baseline going to understand where we want to customize. There's a productivity play to all of that as well, and we all know data scientists aren't cheap, and they like working on impactful problems. So they have a great job market out there. So we definitely don't want to be putting barriers in their way.
Yeah, maybe one thing to add on top of like the infrastructure cost was a good point. One thing that's really hard to account for and typically gets kind of to the background is the maintenance cost of a solution. Lina mentioned buy versus build, and sometimes, we can build this much cheaper ourselves, but then the maintenance of that solution over the years might actually cost more. And then it becomes, ROI computation already has all these different variables. There's another unknown variable that goes in there that's easy to miss.
Yeah, everybody's nodding. I bet everyone's seen that. We can just do this ourselves, and where that goes.
CapEx versus OpEx is a real debate.
Yeah, for sure. Melissa, anything that you would like to add? And by the way, just while we're talking, I'm noticing in the chat, someone was cheering you, saying that the democratization of a solution should totally be brought forth. I second that with Melissa. So we're getting some cheers for your in the chat. But can you add anything to the ROI discussion? Anything else that we maybe missed that you all think of in ROI with your data initiatives?
That because of the type of problem that we are trying to solve at ADP, I think that actually the return on investment is actually making the work of the people who are using our tools, what we have produced better, right? So how exactly do we make sure that the call doesn't take as long as it should take, right? With the data initiative that we have, the project that we have built on, how do we make our chatbot, understand very quickly what the customer wants so that we can basically direct the customer to the right places? I think that that's one part that is often missed, is like, how exactly do we make the life of the people who use our tools better? And I think this is probably one part where I really care about. And also at the same time, when I build those models and we think about those things, I also think about the fact that, at one point also, unfortunately, it looks like we are getting rid of people who, have, family to feed and and things of the sort. So how do we really look at the balance of how things are done? So that's why I really want to think more about the fact that I'm making the life of the workers better with the models that I create. So I think that's something that most companies should care about and look into, to make sure that while they're building those great initiatives, really, is it making the life of the people who are using this better? So that's what I will say.
Oh, interesting. All right. Before we move on from the ROI topic, Lina, anything to add related to ROI?
Yeah. So I think another thing for ROI, I think back to Jan's point on the automation part, right? I think that's lots of times also look into the gaps, because a lot of time things are probably easier to measure with ROI when you have something to compare with. But if there's a gap, which means we are not able to do certain things today, and how with that additional business capability that are now in place, what additional values that this is bringing in, that just think of the ROI perspective. I think be a little creative in defining the savings or additional business flows it's bringing in. I think that's another perspective, like including like with automation, how much resource, how much time we're saving from people. Although to Melissa's point, it may relieve people from doing certain things, but we can retrain them and move them to other type of the workforce. I feel I'm optimistic about the job market. I feel like with AI, there are actually more things to do for example, labeling, like that requires a lot of labor-intensive work that I feel like we don't have enough people to focus on.
Yeah, that's right.
Plenty of work to be done, just maybe shifting a bit. Yeah, for sure. Okay, and me, yes.
If I may just make a quick comment, because I think the other side of the story is also the resource allocation as well, because that becomes super important in terms of if you have 5 projects and now you're adding a 6th project, how are you going to really do the resource allocation? Whether it's like from a data engineering standpoint, data scientist standpoint, any other resources that are supporting you, because ultimately, you know, the biggest challenge that you run into is like, resources are also finite as well. It's not like, you know, you can just spin off another clusters and you're like, all right, more work is getting done. But, you know, so there's that challenge as well. And how do you prioritize? So, and that becomes a pretty big thing once you have multiple projects going on and they're getting close to the end goal. So.
Definitely. Okay. All right. Maybe one more question and then one more topic, and then we'll move to lightning round. I see a lot of questions coming in, so we'll kind of get to that. But real quick before we do, what are people not talking about? Like, we've seen hot emerging technologies come and go, to your point earlier, Evren. Maybe what advice do you have for folks to the best position themselves to capitalize on these technologies, even though they're coming and going? So is there something here that we're just not talking about? And Evren, I'll start with you, since you had kind of a thought on this earlier about it just being the shiny new thing and trying to kind of filter those. So maybe you could comment.
Yeah, I mean, one thing maybe what I want to emphasize is, and I think it was me who mentioned at the beginning of the panel about like privacy and security implication of these technologies. And right now, everybody's like impressed with the results they see. But once you get into the deployment reality, it's like, okay, I cannot send my enterprise data to this external service. What am I going to do here? And obviously, the other side of this is the training data used for these services. I think I've seen some comments on the chat about the bias in the results, for example, because it very much depends on the training data used. So combined together, like, okay, I want to use my organization's data for training, and how am I going to make this happen in a private and secure way? And there are some open source alternatives we are seeing right now emerging. Alternatives like OpenAI already has a big splash with the generative AI technologies they provided. But I think that's going to, like, these open source alternatives providing a kind of behind the firewall capabilities, similar to what we see these kind of hosted services. I think that's where we'll see a lot of attention coming in this year, and maybe it's not getting as much attention outside the technology circles right now.
Yeah, interesting. Anyone have other perspective on what we're not talking about?
Yeah, I'll jump.
Are you on? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I saw it fly through in the chat earlier, but I thought it was a very good comment, which is the misapplication, right? And a little different from the right use case discussion, but we're talking about mostly data science practitioners here. We're talking about people with training in this and with the best intentions in mind. But at the same time, what we also want to be able to do is enable more, and the term's a little bit out of favor now, but citizen data scientists, right? Sort of analysts and personas that might not have the structured training to correctly interpret and understand the inner workings of these algorithms and the assumptions that often go into some of these results that come out. And so maybe with the best of intentions, or maybe with some malicious intentions, you can also have users that are going to be able to do harm with these algorithms. And I think that's something that we also have to acknowledge, and we have to think through the right guardrails and the right governance model then on top of these solutions.
Yep, interesting. For sure. Meet Melissa, Lina, anyone else care to weigh in on what people are maybe not talking about?
Yeah, so I think Evren and Jan, and both of them really covered the points. I think one point I wanted to make is, just because I think the new technology is coming through, if you don't have the applicability, within your ecosystem or the right use cases, he may just not really, be as fruitful, right? And I was kind of like thinking about this question, and I'm like, well, one thing that I think that came very close is the Hadoop. So everybody was in the relational databases, Hadoop came in, and now all of a sudden you can do unstructured and you can do MapReduce jobs, and wow, they rolled in new role, right? And then eventually within a year or two, I would say you pretty much went into the cloud environment, public clouds, right? AWS, Azure, Google. Google came in a little later, but the idea being is now you have all of these technologies coming in. Computational is not a problem, and everything is like available, with interconnectivity. So the world is kind of like at your oyster. But then the questions that becomes is like, okay, well, now you have everything available, but do you really need everything to really solve the problems that you're really going after? So I think that's something that to really, kind of like think about, because now as we think about where the next step is going to be or where we're going to progress, I feel like you're going to have a lot of the ecosystems that are going to get built. They're going to be customized for particular industries, right? Because the solutions is already getting more customized, more fine-tuned. Everybody wants to solve a very customized problem. And hence the counter effect is like new capabilities will be generated as well. So it's an interesting time because like now you have a very fine-tuned solution for a very niche problem. So how do you scale those, niches across the number of niches, and how do you maintain that from a sustainability standpoint as well? Because you want to ultimately not just keep on building these solutions, you have to sustain these solutions as well, to keep that momentum within the business as well. Because at the end of the day, business does not like stock, right? So
for sure. Okay. And so thank you for that. I want to wrap up on our lightning round, but we've got some questions from the in the chat that I'm gonna pick out here a little bit. Jan, you kind of already covered this. This is for everyone, but you touched on it just in your last answer. Generally, do you feel like the concept of data governance is maturing fast enough to get ahead of the shiny new thing feel that the newest AI trends are creating? I think this is almost like a lightning round question, but I'll go ahead and open it up. Quick answers, and anyone have some thoughts there? Jan, I'll throw it to you first since you almost already answered this one.
Well, maybe as a data scientist and wanting to play with the shiny objects and understand the impacts and so forth, I'm going to say yes, because I don't want to worry about it. But quite honestly, and working with my colleagues here from that function, no, I don't think so, unfortunately. And I think that's where there are gaps, not just in processes, but in technologies that then enable an effective governance model on top. And whether that's access, whether that's anonymization of various private data, personally identifiable information, or any kind of other sensitive topics, whether that's explainability and bias detection in some of these outputs and algorithms, I think it's a gap. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to be a little bit more conscious in how we decide to apply that.
Anyone else have anything else you'd like to add to that one about governance?
I mean, maybe I'll just quickly say data governance is more like an organizational culture thing, just like sometimes it might be taught as like, oh, yeah, there's the data governance group, that's their problem, but it's actually everyone's problem who's dealing with data. So you need to have a more holistic approach. And yeah, I think it's a challenge in a large organization, and it's something that needs to be considered before trying new technologies, or maybe need to be considered in conjunction with applying new technologies within the organization.
Yeah, I agree with Evan. So I think there are different pieces in the data governance, data management, right? There are foundational things that every employee in the company, I think, could almost contribute to. On the other side, the new things like the active metadata, like lots of new things, I don't think that's quite mature yet. Like the vendor product, the platform may not all be there, but the concept is out. So I would say start with your foundations, right? The data dictionary, the technical metadata, capture the business metadata, and the lineage. Do what you can, but when the platform is ready, that will make it much easier. I think it's a ever-growing, the evolving area that can be continuously built on. You don't have to wait until everything is mature to start. But I wouldn't chase the latest at this point yet.
Well, it's interesting, Lina, that you weighed in there. There was a question that was specifically to you about laying foundations for a data organization, and like what frameworks you suggest for people beginning this journey. I think you kind of touched on it there. You care to expand just a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I was, for me, this advanced analytics area, there are basically two areas, right? One is the data scientist area that we want to enable them. We want to empower them. We want them to go discover and explore the new things. On the other side, when you want to harvest those insights, the model results into production, into implementation, that's where I think we want to build it in a more established, mature fashion. But that's when the foundation of the whole infrastructure become even more critical. So yeah, having the platform, the ecosystem, I think was also earlier mentioned, start to build that ecosystem, because this has been relatively new, all the cloud computing, all the new AI technology, and the market is not mature yet. They are like new vendors, new products coming up like every day, every month. So and everybody's still growing, including like the big platform providers. So for now, build what's enough for your company, build that ecosystem and keep it open architecture, flexible, expandable as possible. But but I think that's so the foundational back to that foundational data layer, the integration layer, and think about the data access with the privacy, security, and how data can be joined together. That's feedback to the training side of for data scientists, and how do you collect all the derived data and outcome, so you can have this, the monitoring how your program is doing for your business. So that all come back to a holistic data platform, which sitting on top of an integration platform and infrastructure. So having all the infrastructure ready is also, I think, when we build new models, whether implement or train, think about if they are, think ahead, what are the new things you may need that's not already there, and have that part of organization work on it ahead of time. That will, have everybody have a smoother journey along this model building life cycle.
Excellent. Anyone else have advice for that question? For getting started? All right. Just in the interest of time, make sure we get through the lightning round. I have one more question that I'd like to ask you all. I see a couple more here. Well, let me ask a couple more questions for the panel, actually. And this one, we all may not have an informed opinion. It's a question from Shmuel. What opportunities creating generative AI for the future of industry or the future of industrial development of poor and developing countries? So do you have any opinions, any thoughts on how generative AI is helping evolve industrial development in developing countries? Or is that one that maybe is out of our wheelhouse here? Does anyone on the panel like to speak to that?
I think developing countries, I guess I would say that just generative AI is something that can be used. Actually, I did have a panel earlier with some people from Ghana, and I was talking about how generative AI can actually be used to help, the healthcare, because in countries in Africa, for instance, when you have people going farther and farther in remote places to be able to help people with their health, right? The generative AI can actually help them with the training of this people. They can help with training. They can even help with understanding how to speak to the communities about the different problems that they have. How do they solve those problems? How do we get the better water in the system, and all of those different things? And these things are very much helpful. Generative, we can create models, with African data scientists and stuff like that, can create models that will be able to help the people of those countries. So I think that there is a way to do it. It's just that how do we get them to have access to those big models, right? How do we do that?
Right.
How, maybe, communicate or collaborate with them so that they are able to solve the problem that are there. I think in the part of healthcare, in the sense of, farming and things of that sort, I think that there's a lot of things that generative AI can help there.
Excellent. I appreciate that. Let's move on to our lightning round, and it's a pretty simple question. And I think it's a good way to wrap this up. What's one piece of advice that you would give to data innovators attending this conference today? So just one question. What's that one piece of advice you'd give to folks attending today? And Evren, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I would tell them to have a healthy balance of being curious about the new technologies and trying them out while having the skepticism about maybe this is not the right thing. And maybe going back to one of the first thing I said, like, look at the results. I mean, it could be generative AI for you as a new technology, or knowledge graphs, or something else. Look at how the tools are being used, what kind of results you can get out of them, and evaluate your use cases in the context of that. I mean, it's also important not to just dismiss the new technologies like, oh, these new technologies always come and go, because if you don't keep up, you'll be left behind. So,
really good points, Evren. Meet, I see you're reacting there. I'll go to you next.
Yeah, stay curious, take risk, follow your passion. Don't be afraid of failure, because naturally, with every model, you're going to have a few of them, couple, maybe it's the major ones too. And, sharpen your skill set, right? Stay relative to the industry where everything is moving, because everything evolves and evolves further from that. So kind of like the Hadoop example, you started with Hadoop, and then you got the public cloud, and now you have all these technologies, as an offspring of that. So stay relative. Yeah.
Love it. All right. Lina, what one piece of advice would you give the folks attending this conference today?
I'm thinking back the foundational piece, but I guess the business outcome focus, right? So what you are trying to solve. So don't corner yourself when chasing things. So I think that when is good enough. So know when to stop. What is good enough? I think that sometimes could help you from stress yourself too much.
I think that's true, right? A lot of people they like almost lose sight, get that tunnel vision, lose sight of why they're trying to do what they're trying to do. Good advice. Melissa, how about you?
Yeah, I think that as others have said here, I think stay curious is very important. And I think also reading the papers about these new technologies and how they have done. But I think it's also really important to keep thinking about the own problem that you want to see. Maybe by reading this paper, you'll be able to discover something that they have done that you could use for the own problem that is not related to it, but that could be applied to this other problem that you're solving. Depending on the use case that you have to see, is LLMs good for me here, or is something else, right? When you want to build relationship in a model, in your data, maybe it's not a generative model, maybe it's something else. So let's just stay curious, stay open, and not dismiss it, right? Read the papers, because there might be something there that you can use for your own project. So that would be
good advice. And Jan, finally, how about you? Advice to the data innovators attending this conference today?
Yeah, so for me, I mean, data is a team sport. So yes, you as a data innovator, as a data scientist, will be able to put a model together to get a prediction, to get an output. But based on your experiences, based on your biases, that will be reflected in your approach. So being able to discuss that with somebody, being open to new ideas, reading those papers, as Melissa mentioned, of getting those new ideas for your approaches, but actually discussing it with somebody else. I think it's been incredibly helpful for us as a team, for me personally in my career. So definitely want to encourage everybody to stay connected, go to conferences in person when possible, network, see what other experiences are about these technologies, about these approaches, and you will find new ideas that you had never thought of and would never think of by yourself.
Excellent. There's definitely a thread in all of the advice here. So I want to thank everyone. Lina, Melissa, Jan, Meet, it's been really nice to meet you through this process. Thank you. Evren, it's always good to see you. Thank you also for participating. And I hope that the folks who have watched this panel today found it enlightening. Appreciate everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So,
thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.